to me it felt like the end of the world. That's exactly what it felt like. And the word that popped into my head at the time, actually, was Armageddon. And that's what it felt like. It felt like the end of the world.
There is rarely a life untouched by hardship or challenge. On this podcast, we invite our guests to share their very personal stories. We harness the wisdom and resilience of our guests, which has shaped who they are today.
Carl Rogers said, "That which is most personal is in fact most universal." Together we'll be inspired to embrace the resilience in our own stories and to gain strength in the face of adversity and have a few laughs along the way.
Hi, I'm Donna.
And I'm Di. We are the Double Ds and welcome to the Discovery Diaries.
We acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their spiritual connection to family and storytelling.
Both Donna and Di were born here on these lands. We are grateful to draw on the culture of telling and sharing stories, and we hope that you will draw inspiration from the stories that are shared here.
This episode includes a discussion about a natural disaster and a conversation about people who lost their lives. These are incredibly important topics, but if you feel like they're too much for you to listen to right now or you would like to listen with somebody else, please come back to this episode when you feel ready. Welcome to today's podcast. Today's conversation is with Wayne Sankey. He's a retired architect from Perth, and today Wayne is talking to us about a very memorable event in his life that happened nearly 20 years ago, and that's the Boxing Day Tsunami, which was on the 26th of December 2004. Wayne wants to focus on that event and not on any other part of his life. It had such a big impact on his life, and I'm sure that in listening to his story and his account of what happened, you also will be very impacted. So please join me in welcoming Wayne and listening to this incredible story of survival.
Donna, what I love about this podcast is we have got such a huge variety of guests, and I'm really curious about how you met our next guest.
So Wayne and I have worked together, not in the same organisation, but been working with Wayne probably for about 25 years, Wayne, I would say. Yeah, and I would be probably for the last, nearly 20 years, I've been very curious about this story, and I know you haven't really shared it publicly, I think, before, and haven't spoken about it that much. So it's really quite a privilege that you've agreed to come on and to talk about this story. So the story is about Wayne's personal experience with the Boxing Day Tsunami which was on the 26th of December 2004. So coming up to 20 years later this year. And yeah, I would imagine, Wayne, that you can still remember it as if it was yesterday.
I can, yeah. It hasn't gone away.
That's right. So just for our listeners, some background just generally about the Boxing Day Tsunami, and I certainly remember hearing about it and the devastation that it caused. So it's believed to be the deadliest tsunami in history, and it's one of modern history's worst natural disasters. So there were the estimated 230,000 people were killed across 14 countries, and it started off just before 8 a.m. local time off Sumatra, the northern tip of Sumatra in Indonesia. There was a massive 9.1, 9.2 magnitude earthquake, and that sent a huge tidal wave speeding towards Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia and Sri Lanka. In Indonesia alone, there were 170,000 people died. So we might hand over to you now, Wayne, if you can give us some background as to where you were and why you were there, and then just go into your personal experience.
Sure. Well, Allison and I, my wife, Allison, we were, she wasn't my wife at the time, but we were planning a relaxing holiday in Sri Lanka. We were excited to visit there. we liked, the idea of sort of getting a little bit off the beaten track in a few places. And one of the places we chose to visit was Arugam Bay. It's a sort of a surfing location on the southeast coast of Sri Lanka. It was out of season, so it was there weren't a huge number of people there. And, we travelled around for about a week. And on Christmas Day, we came down from Kandy, where we'd been, down into Arugam Bay. And we arrived for the sort of the fateful day. We'd only been there one day.
Mm. And what was your accommodation like, and how far away from the beach were you staying?
Well, we managed to get a little cabana type shack, if you like, probably only 50 metres from the water's edge. So it was right on the edge of the beach. Between us and the beach were a sort of a line of prickly pear cactus, which sort of kept the sort of local people or tourists or anyone else out from the area where the cabana was. So we were right close to the beach.
Mm.
And what were you like? Were you young travellers? Were you sort of I don't know, students, or what stage of your life were you at?
Well, it was 20 years ago, so I was in my late 40s.
You look much younger.
Thank you.
You had me fooled.
Thank you very much. And my wife was in her late 30s, so we were both sort of middle-aged, and just planning a relaxing getaway to see some places we hadn't seen and do some exploring and poke around.
And were you seasoned travellers? Had you travelled other parts of the world?
We had. I'd lived in Malaysia for a little while and worked up there, so I'd been throughout Malaysia working as an architect in Langkawi and KL, and travelled a bit in Europe. And so, we'd done quite a bit of travelling through Southeast Asia and Europe.
And so when you arrived there, did it feel sort of like familiar to be somewhere different, if you know what I mean? Like that was something that you were used to? Well,
definitely. So, I mean, Sri Lanka is it's a lot like Malaysia in a way. The people are different and the food's slightly different. But, it's very similar in terms of climate and the topography and the sort of building and construction and the atmosphere. Very similar.
Mm. So you got there Christmas Day, and then what happened after that?
We arrived Christmas Day, and we travelled all morning. And so the first thing we did was we dumped our bags in the cabana and had a 5-minute walk around. It was just exploring the surrounds, and then we went looking for lunch because we were hungry. And because it was out of season, and because it was about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was a bit hard to find. But we did manage to find a friendly little place that was open, and it was run by an American and his Thai wife. And they looked after us and fed us, and we actually sat down with them. They were eating late as well, so we managed to have a meal with them and just chatted.
Were there many tourists around, or was it more locals that were in the area? Or?
No, it was very deserted. It was very quiet, and probably occupancy was maybe 15 or 20%. So it was out of season. Mm-hmm. It was very quiet where we were.
So then, what happened on the next day when you?
Well, we woke up. It's a beautiful day. It was just a perfect day, and we woke up early, maybe about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And we decided to go for a walk, and we walked down along the beach, and we headed to the right, which I guess is south. We then chatted with some fishermen. They were pulling nets in, and there's a few colourful local characters which we sort of chatted to for a little while, asked them what their catch was like, and we just went right down the beach. We probably walked 2 or 3 kilometres. And it was just a perfect day, perfect morning. We turned around, and on the way back I actually proposed to Allison, so that was
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So it was a memorable day.
Yeah. So
In other ways as
that's
well.
how it happened. And then we walked back to the cabana, and it was about just before 9 o'clock, and Allison went in to the shack, and I went to look for some breakfast, and then I came back and there's a little bit of water. Well, I thought it was a high tide, and it was just starting to come in around our feet, and I just thought it was an extremely high tide with a full moon, and that was the start of it.
Wow. And so you're obviously on cloud nine at that point if you just proposed and on holidays in this beautiful location.
It was perfect.
Yeah. And so what happened after the water came in?
Well, I was concerned that it would get into the hut. Well, Ali went inside and she was lifting things that were low down and putting them on the bed to keep them dry. And I followed her in a few seconds afterwards, and I just shut the door behind me, and it was a big old heavy, sort of the traditional teak type heavy doors, and it just shattered. It just burst into pieces behind me, and a rush of water came into the room and immediately sort of went up to about chest height, and the furniture just got sort of broken up, and Ali was smoking at the time, and the first thing she did was lift her hand up above the water level to keep a cigarette from getting wet.
Wow. Isn't it incredible the kind of things that you remember, the detail of that?
It was very funny, actually. And but she just got catapulted across the room and pushed up against the wall at the back of the hut. And I can remember looking at the water that came in, and now it was sort of up towards shoulder height, and I just thought the construction of it was single brick, and it was a timber beamed roof, and I just remember that my first thought was it's not going to survive, it's going to collapse, and we're going to get trapped, and that was a problem. So the first thing I sort of did was try to swim through the broken up furniture, and it's basically like a washing machine in there. It was just churning around inside, and it was messy. Everything was broken up, and I can remember sort of trying to get under to push my way through and get to Ali. And I knew we had an open bathroom out the back, which was just a wall, an open courtyard that you have a shower and a toilet in, typical sort of Sri Lankan construction. And we got through. I pushed her through the opening, and we got into that little courtyard area. And they had a tree in the courtyard, which we sort of, as the water got higher, we sort of got up. We got up the tree, managed to clamber up the tree a little bit, not out of the water, but enough that we were only half in the water. And the water just kept on getting higher until we were at the top level with the top of the wall that surrounded the little courtyard. I remember the top of the wall had broken glass on it as a sort of intrusion deterrent, and poking out of the top of the wall was a little bit of reinforcing bar, rusted piece of reinforcing bar, and it wasn't very thick. And I bent it over and I made a loop to put my arm in, and I positioned Allison so that the water was pushing her up against the tree. So she was hugging this tree, and the water was behind her, pushing her onto the tree. And I'd turned sideways to the water so that I wasn't fronting the water, and I had one arm through the reinforcing bar and the other arm sort of hanging onto the tree. So I was sideways, which the tree was protecting me a little bit.
And you were, I find it incredible that you were able to think to do anything at that point, but there's something must have kicked in. I don't know if it was your architecture training or something that you were just running on instinct at that point, or?
Look, honestly, I honestly don't know what I was running on, but I was certainly running. I just knew that the hut would collapse, and if a roof falls in on you and you're underwater, you've not got much chance. So all I really wanted to do was to get out of the hut. And it happened to be a tree there. And
what sort of tree was it?
Honestly, I can't remember.
So was it like a kind of palm type
No,
of
it wasn't
tree?
a palm tree. It was. It wasn't a palm tree, but it was. It had a fairly solid trunk, so it was probably 200, 300 millimetre diameter trunk. It could have been a tamarind tree or something similar to it.
Did you worry that the tree was also going to get knocked over, or did you feel
Absolutely.
yeah.
I was worried that my wall was going to get knocked over. I had my arm looped through a steel bar that was part of the wall. So I thought, well, if that goes, then I'll go. Then Allison will be, the tree would go. And so, but, it all happened so fast. You didn't have time to get concerned. You just had time to sort of do one or two things. And I think luck played a big part, and we were incredibly lucky. But we made one or two right decisions, and I think that's basically was what stood in our favour in the end. So.
Did the water keep rising while you were grabbing onto the tree?
It's funny. I can remember looking sideways and seeing things floating past, like logs and bits of construction material and fridges. It's amazing. Fridges float. And rats, lots of rats. And just everything floating. Just a melee of things, just a soup. It was racing along, going, coming in and then going out. But then I can't remember looking forward, but I do remember a bit later, because the water came in and Allison was positioned on the tree so that the water pushed her on and I was sideways. And then after a little while it changed direction and then went out. So I had to get Allison to move around the other side of the tree so that she was continually had the water pressure holding her onto the tree. And I just stayed in my position because I was sideways. But I could remember when the water's running out, sometime I looked out to sea or out to the ocean, and I can remember seeing a big stopper wave because there were some rocks on the beach in front of us, and it had obviously produced the stopping waves that the canoes and kayaks try and avoid because it just holds them in an eddy and traps them. It was a big wave, but I wasn't looking down at it. I was looking up at it. So, we were probably located 2.5, 3 metres off the ground, and we were looking up at this wave, which was maybe 50 to 60 metres away. And so it was probably 2 stories tall at the time. And I can remember thinking, we do not want to go anywhere near that wave. So that was pretty much it. I don't know, that was the sum of my thoughts, is stay away from the wave.
Were you just sort of hanging on for dear life on the tree? And
Yeah. And just wondering what was going on with the world. It was.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Well, what did you think was going on? Did you have time to even think about that? Or
I wondered whether to me it felt like the end of the world. That's exactly what it felt like. And the word that popped into my head at the time actually was Armageddon. And that's what it felt like. It felt like the end of the world.
Must have been.
I had no idea
terrifying.
what was happening because we didn't see a wave and we didn't see anything coming. It just we was just sort of inundated and underwater all of a sudden. It was quick, very, very, very quick.
Today's episode is brought to you by my online course, Emerge from the Pit. This course I developed for anyone who is going through a sudden and unexpected life event when they were least expecting it and is struggling to cope. This happened to me in late 2021, where my life was going extremely well, and then in an instant everything was turned upside down and I struggled to cope. Over the next weeks and months, I documented my recovery and the tools and strategies I used to get through this extremely difficult period of my life. So if you can relate to this and you're struggling to cope with something that's unexpected and life-changing that has happened to you, then check out my online course, Emerge from the Pit. And for our listeners on Double D's podcast, there's a 20% discount. If you go to my website, www.donnasbalconyviews.com.au, you can click on the online course and check it out. And if you think it's something you can relate to and something that can help you based on the tools that help me, then put in the coupon code double D, so one word, double DS, and check it out. And these are things that I developed over time and that really, really helped me a lot. And I know that if you're in a similar situation, they can help you too.
I'm so struck by your ability, or something that kicked in where it's just pure instinct, and you managed to, even with that coming on you so quickly, to formulate a plan to get out. You know, you understood, I don't know if it was your architecture training or not, but you understood the nature of where you needed to be, you know, and moved both you and Allison toward that. And, you know, I know you're shaking your head, but something kicked in there that enabled you to get to the next thing that you knew to do almost.
I just didn't want to be in the hut. That was It was just what I knew instantly, that I didn't want to be in that hut, and the hut collapsed. So if we had to be in
so did it collapse quite quickly after that? Then,
it did.
Sort of in front of you.
I can't remember watching it collapse, but I think part of it started to collapse when the water was receding. I think the roof, when we got down, the roof was tilted to one side, and later when we went back, that was after the second wave, because there were two waves. It was sort of just flat on the ground, basically in broken up pieces, none of which were over waist height. So it was, you know, it had been broken down. But the roof, one wall collapsed, and that brought the roof down inside. So we would have been in there in that first wave if we had have stayed in. I just knew it's an unstable structure. You know, it was single brickwork structure with no reinforcing elements. You know, it's inherently not a place to be in a situation like that.
Wayne, how long do you think, you may not have realised at the time, but how long do you think it was that you were hanging on to the tree before the water started receding? Was it a few minutes? Or?
Lots of people ask me that question, and honestly, it felt like 5 or 10 minutes, but I'm told that it was more like 20 by other people. And by other accounts, talking to other people, the first wave lasted about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sure things would have almost...
But it went quickly.
Yeah, and then time would have stood still in a way, and yet gone so quickly.
It exactly stood still. That's a perfect description. Yeah.
And then when did this second wave come?
Well, the first wave receded, and you know, we went down the tree as the water went down, and you know, we just sort of looked around, and Allison found a key to our. They had a big wooden box in the hut where you kept your valuables. It was just a roughly made carpenter's chest, basically, and it had a big lock on it. And the key to the lock was on a red ribbon, and she found that up a tree.
Wow.
That was not far away. And she got that, and I looked across, and all the walls and all the buildings up and down the beach had been knocked over. So you could, whereas previously you could only see maybe 30 or 40, 50 metres, now you could see hundreds of metres in all directions, and it was just the same everywhere. It was just everything had been levelled. You know, it just looked like a bulldozer had gone through everything. And there were some people further up the beach, and I could see that they were trying to pull the roof off a hut, and I went down to help them, and I helped them lift the roof off a hut, and they pulled a couple of people out. There was an elderly man and his wife were trapped in there, and they were unconscious. And the people that were trying to help them, that I went to help, happened to be some young Canadians, and they were brilliant. Yeah.
Were those people local people, the unconscious people?
No, they were just travellers. They were
as well.
two young couples in their mid-20s, Rick and Sam and Liz, Sonia. And, yeah, they were just holidaying and travelling around Sri Lanka. And but, you know, they were fabulous.
Well, did those people that were unconscious that got pulled out, did they survive?
Yes, they did. They were given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and they came to. It was fabulous. And then we started to move them up to an area where it was a little bit higher and where there was away from the beach. And at that time I looked out to the ocean and I can remember the horizon lifted, so it just disappeared. You know, instead of the horizon being where it should be, I had to look up and it was another wave that was coming, and I just yelled another wave and I ran back to Allison, and then we just ran for it. We ran to the only high ground there was, which was a reasonably high sand dune about but maybe 600 metres away.
How soon did that wave come after you saw it?
It was behind us. It was coming in as we were running, but we were still quite a way in front of it. You know, it was hundreds of metres behind us. But when we got to the top of the sand dune, we watched the water come in and we watched it get higher and higher. And there were already a gathering, because that was the only point. Arugam Bay is a very low area and the surrounds for a long way inland are low and marshy, and it adjoins a national park and a sort of a preservation area. So this was the highest point for kilometres around.
It was fortunate that there was a high point.
It wasn't very high. It was only, I think it was 15 metres.
Oh, wow. And were you worried that the wave was going to come?
We were all worried. There was about 200 people that gathered at that point.
Wow.
And, yeah, we were watching it come up, just basically willing it not to come as high as we were.
And how far from you did it come?
It came about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way up the top of the dune, and there were some local people up there, and there was quite a bit of theatrics going on as well. It was not a very pleasant thing. It was quite that was scary. That's when you actually started to feel a bit of fear, because
you were watching the human interaction and response to that. So human fear playing out in different ways.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Did you sort of feel calm yourself, or maybe calm on the outside, but obviously terrified probably inside?
Well, I looked around and there's nowhere high. There's a very small tree which is about 2 metres high at the top of the sand dune. There was no point. If the water got that high, there was no point in climbing the tree. Some people I didn't see it, but I heard people up there saying that some people started to run inland because the water was coming in again. So they were making their way through the low areas and moving as far inland as quickly as they could. And I heard that they made it to safety, but for a while there everyone thought that they were in trouble because the water went a long way inland because it was so flat.
And how long approximately were you on that sand dune and waiting and watching? And was it a few minutes that you were watching the water, or did it take a lot longer than that?
We were about 2 days on top of that sand dune, so it became home in a way.
So there were about 200 other people, you said, on there as well?
Yeah. There were 210 or 212 tourists, I believe, that were on top there, and some locals.
How big was that area? Like how close together were you for that 2.5 days?
It was a big sand dune, and it was probably the size of a football field on the top there. It was a very gentle rise up and gentle rise down, so it wasn't like we were all crowded together sitting around. You could move around. There was quite a bit of room. Yeah, it was like a football field on top. What
did you think when it became clear that the water wasn't going to come up and it started receding again? What was your reaction, and what was everyone else's reaction?
Well, we went back down. My first reaction was we need water. We got a lot of people. We had no water. We had no food. I know the three rule is 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. So I knew we couldn't last too long. It was hot. I knew we couldn't last too long without water.
Yeah, that was my next question. What sort of temperature was it?
It was hot and humid, probably 36, 37 degrees, but very high humidity.
And I imagine a lot of people just had various ranges of clothing or protection or none or some or...
Well, one of the characters I met when we were going up the hill for the first time was a young guy, and his name's Nate Burkus, and he had a tea towel. That's all he had to cover himself with. And I'd managed to find a pair of my shorts in the tree where Allison found the key. So I gave Nate my shorts and they happened to fit him. So he then told us a story of, he lost his partner. We went looking for his partner there. But, that was not a very pleasant time. But, we searched everywhere for his partner, but we couldn't find any sign of him.
And what there must have been quite a number of people that had gone missing, were there? Or?
Yeah, I've read some of the discussions I had with some of the people that were up there after I'd returned to Perth. They told me that 650 people had gone missing and roughly 250 people had died in that little community of Arugam Bay. Yeah, that's what I was told. So, yeah, there's a lot of missing people. There was another English chap he'd lost his wife and he was looking for his wife, and the couple that we'd had lunch with the previous day, the American chap with his wife, they had a little boy and he'd gone missing.
Oh, gosh, wow.
This podcast is brought to you by my business, Coming Up for Air. That's coming up number 4, Air. This is a business which cultivates curiosity, compassion and courage through executive coaching, workshops and leaders' retreats. Donna, you've been to one of my retreats.
Yes, and as a senior leader, I decided to invest in myself and go for a day. It was on the weekend, a full day retreat. I'm so glad I did go. It was just what I needed in my life at that time. We spent time on our own, reflecting on questions that you gave us, Di. We spent time with others there, being creative, which I don't often get the chance to do in everyday life. And my absolute favourite part was spending some time with the horses that were on the property. The horses have such a calming effect, and I just left the retreat feeling completely rejuvenated and had time to think about some important life questions that you don't usually take the time out to think about.
Thanks, Donna, and I didn't pay her to say that. I do run retreats at various times through the year, which are open retreats, ideal for leaders, just as you said, Donna, to get away from the busyness of work and life, and often we don't take this time to invest in ourselves. You can find me on Instagram or at comingup4air.com.
Do you feel that people helped sort of all got together or was it just such a desperate situation that...
No, very much. People were very good. Again, there was the Canadians and I went down with them and we were collecting water bottles because there were water bottles scattered everywhere, left on the beach. The bottled water, and we were collecting that because we didn't have any water, and we were collecting anything that had floated back or been washed back. Medicated shampoo was something because everyone had cuts and abrasions, and some people were quite badly injured as well. Right. So anything we thought could be useful, we grabbed shoes, thongs. Because people didn't have anything for their feet, and they were walking around, and it was, there was debris on the ground that could cut your feet. So anything we thought could be useful, we were gathering, and we brought it back. And then there were other people. There was a girl who'd done some nursing training, and she was helping people. And there was a doctor there, and he was helping those who were severely injured. There was a peacekeeper. I think he was Norwegian, and I can't remember his name, but it was a very typical Norwegian name, like Gunsen or Johansson. But he was fabulous, and he had a satellite phone, and he was making calls, but his battery was going flat, so he was letting people use the phone. And there was another phone there that someone had that could call out as well, and people were using it just to get a message out that they were safe.
When did you find out, Wayne, that it was a tsunami?
Oh, that night. The rest of the day we were basically looking for people and collecting water and trying to get people that needed help. There's a lot of people were in shock, so they were just, they were just sitting still and not doing anything, and they needed help. So during the day, but towards the night, people sort of got together and were actually talking about what had happened a bit. And there was a girl there, and she knew something about tsunamis. So she was explaining a tsunami, and the peacekeeper had also had information about the earthquake. So we sort of knew what had happened by that evening, and then we were talking about it. We were told it was in Indonesia, and we were trying to work out how it got so far from Indonesia to Sri Lanka. Basically, the explanation we all worked out was that it was like a waterbed. If you jump on one side of a waterbed, the water goes up at the other side almost instantly, and that's a sort of theory that stuck in my head. But that was sort of through general discussion with people there. But yeah, there was one girl who knew a little bit about tsunamis, and she was telling us a few facts about what she thought might have happened.
I remember when this tsunami happened, I don't think I knew of anyone at that point that actually knew what a tsunami was. There was coastal engineers, yes, but the general population, it was just something that was completely unheard of, and no one really knew what it was. So it must have been just such a shock finding out, and that you had actually been caught up in one.
Yeah, no, I understood what a tsunami was. You sort of hear stories about them being like gigantic waves. Well, this was nothing like what I'd imagined a tsunami to be. If you've ever put a plate in a sink full of water and it sort of floats for a minute, and then all of a sudden the water rushes in and it just collapses to the bottom of the sink, that's what it felt like. It felt like the land had collapsed and the water just rushed in. So that's my feeling of what happened. And even when we're on the hill watching the water come up, it wasn't a gigantic wave. The water was just coming in. It was like a tide coming in very fast and getting higher and higher.
So did you realise partly from talking to people who did know a little bit about tsunamis, that another wave wouldn't come? Or was there still this fear after a couple of days that we really still are completely uncertain as to whether this is over?
No, there was. We all expected another wave to come, and even if we thought that it might not come, we were still very scared, fearful that there would be another wave, and we were fearful that another wave might come while we were sleeping, because everyone was exhausted, and everyone's just snatching, 20 or 30 minutes of sleep and then waking up and walking around, and this is happening all night. In fact, there was one house in Arugam Bay that was above the tsunami line, and water came right up to the doorway, but the house remained intact. And a few people had gone down and were sleeping in that house. And it was like an open house by that stage, because the devastation was just amazing. So the house was just visited by people, but most of the people I know wouldn't go down. They wanted to stay on high ground, as high as possible. And I was one of them, and Ellie and I slept on the ground. until it started raining early in the morning, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. It started to rain, and we just looked at each other and said, "Let's go down to the house," because we was starting to get cold and we'd been out all night, and we just thought, no, we'll get out of the rain and go down to the house and get some comfort.
What at that point did you wouldn't have known when you were going to be able to be rescued or anything like that?
No, we knew nothing. We knew we didn't have water. We knew we didn't have food. We had no idea if anyone was going to come from Sri Lanka. People had phoned out on the two. As far as I'm aware, there were only 2 working phones on the hill, and we knew that people knew that where we were and what was happening, but we didn't know anyone was going to come for us. And I sort of figured we could be there for a couple of days at least.
So what did happen next after a couple of days?
Well, nothing happened that day and that night, but the next morning a helicopter arrived. There was an army base not a long way away, and they had some old helicopters. Sri Lanka at that time was engaged in a civil war with the Tamil Tigers, and we were in Tamil Tiger area. So the next morning this helicopter arrives, and it's like a helicopter you might see in an old Vietnam War movie. And it was fully kitted out with the machine guns and the soldiers. So that arrived, and it landed on the top of the hill where we all were. We all made room for it, and it landed. And believe it or not, 3 people, they were up where we were in Arugam Bay that time. There was a politician holidaying and a fairly important religious person and a European industrialist, let's call him. And they were sort of community leaders, I guess, so they were quite prominent. They went to the helicopter and spoke with them, and they seemed to know the people that, the military that were running the helicopter, and spoke to them. Anyway, I understood that they were organising to evacuate the injured people, but they just got on the helicopter and left.
Oh, these 3 people.
3 people.
Goodness.
Wow.
It was unbelievable.
Having never heard the story at all, I'm gobsmacked listening to it. But what was the response when you're watching this helicopter take off with just 3 people on it?
Well, disbelief.
Yeah.
From me, and I think there was disbelief from the entire crowd. But we were told the helicopter was coming back, but it didn't come back for quite a while. It was maybe 4 or 5 hours before it came back. And my understanding is these people were flown to Colombo, which was a long way away, and then the helicopter returned. And then that afternoon it took away the injured people first, so they started to evacuate. But because it was fully loaded with ammunition and they wouldn't jettison the ammunition, it could only take maybe 5 or 6 people at a time. So there were 3 crew on the helicopter, 2 in the cockpit and 1 on the gun, and they flew the entire time like that. So it took, there were a lot of trips flying back and forward and back and forward.
And so between each trip, was it sort of an hour or you sort of...
Yeah, roughly 45 minutes to an hour, because they actually ended up evacuating all the subsequent flights to a nearby army base, which was about 30 or 40 kilometres away. So it was, it wasn't too long between trips.
So was that all of the people on the hill then taken to the army base essentially?
It was.
And until the last people were off?
Yep, until, all the tourists were vacated, but the locals that lived there, they were still there. And
they weren't allowed to come, or they didn't want to come, or it wasn't obvious what
I think they stayed. They had their, they had housing and accommodation there, so they stayed there. It was their home. I asked about them, and I was just told that they're staying where they are.
So how long was it before you and Ali got to go on the helicopter? In total, a couple of days?
A long while. We were the second last evacuation, and we got evacuated with 2 of the Canadians and I think there was a body on with us in our trip as well, and the American father of the child that had gone missing. And the other Canadians were on the last flight out with the mother of the child. So,
was there any panicking or everyone was quite calm in taking their turns to get on the plane, the helicopter?
No, it was quite calm. After about 3/4 of the people had been evacuated, there was still probably maybe 20 or 30 of us left. And the peacekeeper, he got a message on his phone that there was another earthquake and that we should be preparing for another tsunami. And the earthquake was possibly larger or worse than the original one.
Gosh.
So we got a bit anxious.
I can imagine.
And that's about the most biggest understatement I've heard ever.
I was very pleased to take off, very, very pleased.
So you're now all at the army base.
Yes.
And was there any provision there for you?
There's a bus. We then got on a bus. It was an old bus, but it worked perfectly well. And they took us to I think we were in Ampang or Ampun, a local community, and there was a local plantation owner, and he put up a group of us, and I think we were billeted around that village in sort of groups. So yeah, and we were looked after very well. They were wonderful people, and yeah, they had clothes, because we basically just had the clothes we were wearing. So they had clothes there, and they fed us and bedding.
And you were able to maybe get a little bit more sleep for the first time in probably what must have felt like about a month.
Yeah, no, it was good. But they had lost 2 or 3 of their relatives in the tsunami as well. So it was sort of amazing to hear that they were suffering quite badly, and yet they were looking after us really well.
This episode is brought to you by Impact Society. Impact Society is a company focused on helping everyday managers become world-changing leaders. They provide straightforward and stylish tools, training and content to elevate leadership skills and mindsets and help leaders thrive both at work and in life. I personally know the company founders, Sean and Joel, and they have set up Impact Society as they saw a gap in the market for leadership training for technically based staff that wasn't as expensive or as lengthy as a MBA or other leadership courses at university. So essentially they've scratched their own itch. They both come from technical backgrounds, and then Joel set up his own consultancy company, and Sean has been in diverse leadership roles in government and the private sector. We are especially excited about Impact Society bringing you this episode because they have a new product, a strategic planning toolkit, which is designed to help leaders put in place a straightforward strategic plan that any organisation or team can follow. As many of us know, strategic planning is not the easiest or most straightforward thing to do. So this toolkit, I've had a good look at it myself. It's completely clear, easy to follow. There's checklists, there's emails, everything you could need to put in place a strategic plan. And for our listeners of the Double D's podcast, there's a 20% discount on this strategic planning toolkit. You just need to go to impactsociety.co, and in the discount code, when you purchase the strategic planning toolkit, you put in the discount code Double D's, so Double DS at the checkout, and then you'll get your 20% discount. So we would encourage anyone, especially people who are new into leadership roles, to check it out.
Was everyone just in complete shock at that point? You were kind of processing what had happened, and
it felt like we were starting to get over it. I think we just really, but we hadn't. What we really hadn't done is we really had tried not to think about it for a while. So that's what I think.
But you're still literally just days after the event at this stage. It's so recent still.
Yeah.
And you're just probably realising you're able to come somewhat out of survival, fear of your life imminently. But there must have been a lot still running through your body.
Well, we hadn't quite finished yet. From there, we were taken on another bus back to Colombo. That bus ride was probably almost as nerve-wracking as the experience on the hill, but in a different way. It's because we were all thinking that we'd survived the tsunami. We all had, but the bus trip, there were a couple instances on the bus trip that were very close.
Was it because of the terrain?
Yeah, the terrain. We travelled a back road back, and it was a very bad road. It was one of those ones you might see in one of those reality TV shows where they have truckers going through all these back mountain roads with landslides, and it was a fairly bad road. And at one time the bus only just managed to pull up before a train crossing when a train was going through.
Oh gosh!
And that was most people were asleep. That was during the night time. The bus basically locked up its wheels and people ended up on the floor. But it was
hadn't made contact with the train.
No, we managed to stop just before the crossing.
Goodness me!
But after that it was fine. So that was the end of the experience.
Wow. And how do you think that it's impacted on you kind of going forward, I guess, and having such a close to death encounter, I guess, and also with such a group of people as well, and natural thing as well.
It's interesting because, you saw the people, pull together sort of on the hill, and, you saw people that had gone through amazing things. I was a bit scratched and bruised and banged up, and Ali was a little bit scratched. But there were people up there who were injured fairly seriously, and they everyone helped, and they were great. One lady climbed a tree and she was bitten by a snake up the tree.
Oh my gosh!
And she was an English lady, and she was so funny. And there's a German guy, Andre, and he said it was like being reborn. He said he got pushed out. So it was good to see people sort of, seeing things that were humorous in such a bad situation, and, all doing the right thing, apart from the three people taking the helicopter ride out.
That sounds like a whole book in itself.
I still haven't reconciled that in my mind, but still.
I'm really struck by the amount of names that you've remembered.
Well, yeah, it's sort of something that I just haven't forgotten. And I have forgotten a lot. So I'm getting to the age where I'm starting to forget. But no, I mean, yeah. We did keep in contact with some of them.
Okay.
I got emails from, from Andre and from the Canadians, Rick and Sam, and even Nate. I contacted Nate Burkus and got some emails back, and we contacted a little bit, but so we did keep in contact for a little while. And
I'm thinking our listeners might be thinking, tell us, you got to Colombo, but how did you get home?
That was the good part. That's the good part of the story. When we got to Colombo, we went to the Australian Embassy, and the first thing they gave us was beer and pizza.
You would have remembered that.
So we got looked after. They billeted us out to an Australian living in Colombo, and so we stayed with them, and the embassy tracked down travel documents for us and organised with Qantas. We were flying with Qantas, but we got flown out ahead of our schedule, re-ticketed so we were really well looked after, and they contacted relatives and friends in Perth, which was important because we'd managed to get a message out that we're okay, but that was all. So they contacted people for us. So the embassy looked after us very well, but that wasn't the case with all people. Andre, who was born in, he's Dutch, but he was a German resident, he ended up being given a few euros and pointed to an oval and slept out on the oval for a couple of nights and had to scrape together his own airline ticket and re-ticket himself. So when I wrote to him and I told him how, what had happened to us, he wanted to be a resident Australian after that.
I bet he did. Thanks, Australia. You've done well there.
Did you sort of have this sense that how did we manage to get out of that?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot because honestly, people we'd talked to the day before didn't. So many people there whose partners or friends didn't. And, I think, we were very lucky. Just the timing, if we had have been walking along the beach, everything would have been different. If we had have been maybe outside the chalet, it could have been different, So it's just that was just pure luck. We did a few things right. We got out of the hut as quickly as possible and we got hold of the tree and, we used the water pressure to keep us pinned to the tree, which, there's no way in the world you could hang on. So the water pressure was actually keeping us in place. So there's decisions that we made sort of without even thinking. It's just you just did it. You didn't even think at the time. But later I did think, okay, well, no, we did make one or two decisions that were probably important. But
I would say life-saving.
But a lot of it is just luck, So you'd combine the two together and it worked.
So, we're obviously talking about something that happened nearly 20 years ago, but what was it like being home in those first few weeks and months, and how did you start to process some of what had happened to you? Did you have any support?
No, I didn't, but I think I should have. I think that was a mistake that I made. I felt okay. I knew what had happened. I understood it. I was still emotional when I talked about it. But that was to be expected, I thought. But sometime later we went on a holiday, just a short holiday to Bali, and I know I was nervous about staying in the hotel where we were, which was on the beach. And I know I've reacted to certain things in the past, particularly when I see a wave in the ocean that doesn't look right. And it certainly made me realise how things can change and totally be out of your control so very, very quickly, and how focused you sort of have to stay to keep track if you're doing something that you think might be, just a little bit dangerous. Things can change and, sometimes you've got control of it and sometimes you haven't, but just to be aware of that.
And has it changed your general outlook on life, like in terms of what matters to you maybe?
I'd love to say it has, but it's probably made me appreciate things more. It's made me think that I am lucky and that other people aren't or cannot be lucky, and to appreciate what I've got. I can't say I had an epiphany, but it has certainly made me think how lucky I have been and to sort of cherish that luck, yes.
Well, it's quite an incredible story, Wayne, and I really appreciate you coming in today to talk about it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or to let people know about anything else, or any final words about this experience? And
well, I think there's a lot of people who were in Thailand, a lot of Australians who were in Thailand, and they would have experienced similar or worse experiences as well. And so it is something that you do go through, and you eventually come out the other side, I suppose. With me, it was good that I saw people pulling together and people sort of the camaraderie of people who didn't know each other, helping people, people who didn't even speak the same language.
But that's come up before in different circumstances on the show, this whole sort of, if you go through something very traumatic with people, you do see the good side of human nature coming out, and you do feel a deep bond with the people that you've gone through that with as well.
Yeah. I would very much like to meet the people again that were there with us. So maybe one day.
Because you can talk about it with others, but it was only those people that actually lived through that, and it seems like it was quite an incredible experience, very, very traumatic. And as you say, even though it was unlucky going through it, to actually have survived and make it makes you really appreciate life.
Yes, yeah. Very appreciative.
Yeah.
We never know, Wayne, where this podcast might go or who might be listening, but it would be quite incredible if it led somehow to meeting somebody again from that experience. And we've loved having you on. Thank you for sharing your story. It's been very powerful and we really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Wayne. If you've enjoyed this episode today, please share it with people you know who you think will benefit and enjoy it. Also, please follow us so you'll be alerted when we release our next podcast. And please give us a positive review.
Gosh, I feel, that's the first time I've met Wayne and heard the story. Incredible.
Yeah, it's certainly something that for 20 years he hasn't really spoken a lot about it, and I think everyone wanted to know more details. But when you really hear all of the details about what happened, you really get an understanding of these natural disasters and just how traumatic, and it's really about survival and how things can happen so quickly, which is what Wayne said.
And I said this to Wayne after we stopped recording, that I had this real picture that he was able to so vividly describe because it was first-hand account, and I could see it almost running like a movie, something that you could never imagine would actually be happening to you. I think one of the things that struck me also about Wayne was how concerned he was for the local people. And also there were particular heroes in the story from his point of view, which were the Canadians. And because they were just their humanity, the best of humanity came out in them. And I think Wayne wanted us to highlight that, maybe.
Absolutely. After we finished recording, he did mention a number of times both of those things. And I think that's where, in the worst of all possible circumstances, there can be some good come out of it, in that the humanity and the kindness and the selflessness that was shown by both this group of Canadians and also the local people.